Chapter 3. The very bad thing gets worse. 20 minutes later, Angus stood with his mum in front of Mr. Dingwall's desk. His knees were wobbly and he felt like he'd been force-fed a loaf of mouldy bread. This was crazy. He hadn't stolen anything. What the heck was going on? "What do you have to say for yourself?" asked the principal. With thin lips pinched tightly together in disapproval, he threw a piece of paper onto the desk. Angus and his mother peered at it. A photograph. It showed Angus's tidy tray, pulled out and placed on top of his desk. There it was, up the back left on top of his science book, and just right of his glue stick sat Layla's sparkling diamantine cat sticker encased mobile phone. From somewhere, a clock ticked smugly. Was this a joke? A bad dream? "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" repeated the principal, not laughing and very much awake. Angus opened and closed his mouth, and then opened and closed it again. He desperately wanted to speak, but his brain and tongue, usually a pretty good team, no longer seemed to work. Instead, his mother spoke. "Angus, is that your tidy tray?" Finally, his brain found first gear. "Yes," he spluttered, "but I didn't put Layla's phone in it. I didn't take her phone." Mr. Dingwall was unconvinced. He demanded to hear Angus's explanation for how a search of his classroom had resulted in finding the missing phone among his belongings if he himself hadn't put it there. Angus felt the heat rise up from his guts. This was ridiculous. He said he had absolutely no idea how the phone had ended up in his tray, repeated he had not put it there, and for good measure added that he wouldn't be caught dead with that stupid sparkling thing if you paid him. This didn't improve things. Dingwall placed his hands behind his back, rocked on his heels, and said that now would be a good time to start telling the truth. "I am telling the truth." Angus felt salt water prick his eyes. He would not cry. He would not cry. He would not cry. "Mr. Dingwall," said Angus's mother, "I'll be the first to tell you that my son, like all children, is not perfect. Sometimes he's argumentative, occasionally forgetful, and heaven knows he can be infuriatingly stubborn. But one thing he is not, Mr. Dingwall, is a liar. If Angus says he didn't steal this girl's phone, then I believe him." Good old mum. "Do you have any other evidence that implicates Angus?" Dingwall cleared his throat and fiddled with his watchband. "Well, no, not at this stage," he said. "But with respect, Mrs. Adams, it is fairly strong evidence. I mean to say, we will continue our investigation into this. However—" "Why don't you have it fingerprinted?" asked his mother with a sigh. "Then you'll know if he's been anywhere near it." Angus's heart sank like the Titanic. He had no choice but to explain that he had, in fact, touched the phone that day. At first break, Layla had been passing it around to show everyone a video of a hula-hooping cat. Mr. Dingwall said that was very convenient, then wasn't it? Angus said that since he was innocent, he in fact found it extremely inconvenient. Briskly, Dingwall told Mrs. Adams he would appreciate it very much if she would be good enough to please conduct a thorough search of Angus's room at home, since several other items of a similar nature had disappeared recently, and he was sure Mr. and Mrs. Adams would prefer to do this themselves than have the police involved. This was horrifying. "Of course, this is all very disappointing, Angus," Dingwall continued. "As I said, we will be continuing our investigation, but in the current circumstances, it would not be appropriate for you to represent the school at the National Robotics Championships in Sydney next month. I'm sure you understand." Angus did not understand. You can't do that," he said hotly. But Mr. Dingwall said indeed he could and would. Back at home, Angus's parents searched his bedroom. While he looked on from the doorway, his cheeks red hot spots of humiliation. His mother told him she was sorry as she looked in his top drawer under his undies and socks. His dad was poking about in his wardrobe, checking under his old Lego set, soccer boots and skateboard. "Don't worry, mate, it'll be okay," he said, closing the wardrobe door. "How?" wondered Angus. As if reading his mind, Dad said he was sure the real thief would be caught, and then Angus would be cleared and off to Sydney with Hamish. No problems, absolutely nothing to worry about. But what if the thief wasn't caught? That would be a problem, wouldn't it? And definitely something to worry about. After searching everywhere there was to search, his parents put on faces that were too cheerful, and a voice that was too bright. Mum suggested they should all go and eat dinner. Shaking his head, Angus told her he wasn't hungry, and for once, she didn't insist. "World's going crazy," said his father on the way out. "You know, John from 2 doors up had his truck stolen the other night." After his parents had gone, Angus sat on his Darth Vader quilt cover and stared at his feet. This wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare. In front of the whole school, he'd been told he was going to Sydney, only for it to be ripped away from him. Worse, everyone at school was going to think he was a thief. A fat tear rolled down his cheek. Alone now, he didn't try to stop it. It was soon chased by another. The sound of small feet softly padding into the room made him look up. It was Liam. He put his arms around Angus. "I'll save you some spaghetti," he said. Angus tossed and turned and fought with his sheet all night. The sheet won. At 6 a.m. he climbed out of bed unsure if he'd slept at all. He dressed quickly. A family of kookaburras shared a joke outside as he pulled on his cross-trainers. He went down the stairs quietly, hoping to avoid Mum. No such luck. The woman had supersonic hearing. "That's you, Angus? If you're going for a run, hang on a sec, I'll come too," she called. Pretending he hadn't heard, he was out the door and off before she could say anything else. The cool morning air was in stark contrast to the burning anger inside him, which he took out on the footpath by pounding it as hard as he could. He ran and was soon covered in a fine sheen of sweat. It felt good to do something so familiar, especially since everything had become so weird. Once he got into a rhythm, Angus felt he could run forever. Maybe he would. As he ran, he went over the previous day's events for the millionth time. The initial shock had worn off like a fog lifting, and he was able to think more clearly. Someone had put Layla's phone in his tray. That much he knew. But why? Was this someone out to get him in trouble? Or had his tray been picked at random because someone had needed to hide the phone quickly or something? There was another thing he knew for sure. He wasn't going to take this lying down. There was only one thing to do. He was going to find out who the real thief was, clear his own name, and go to Sydney with Hamish. Simple. Okay, not simple. Difficult. Impossible? Maybe. But not a thing to lose by trying. On his way home, he ran past the park near the shops and glanced over to see a dark-haired girl kicking a soccer ball. She was alone. He normally wouldn't have noticed, particularly being so preoccupied. But it was an odd sight for this time of the morning. Still too early for the mother and toddler brigade, so the park would normally be empty. Early riser, he thought, and vaguely recognised her as a newish girl from school. She booted a great left footer and glanced up at him as he went past, and like a punch to the stomach, Angus was acutely reminded that everyone at school would soon think him a thief. Probably today. Wonderful. Bzzz, bzzz. His iPad vibrated impatiently as he pulled off his stinky socks. It was Hamish, Skyping. Figuring it was better to tell him now before someone else did, Angus answered the call and poured out his tale of woe to an open-mouthed and goggle-eyed Hamish, who didn't seem to be able to say anything other than "Crikey!" Is a huge fan of Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, even though he was, dead and everything. Hamish's favourite exclamation was "Crikey!" which often got a bit annoying. But on this occasion, Angus let it pass, thinking the situation did in fact warrant several crikeys. Once he was crikeyed out, Hamish, being a true friend, didn't hesitate to join Angus in mutual outrage that someone had done this to him and vowed that together they would uncover the truth, and together they would definitely be going to Sydney, or he, Hamish, wouldn't be going either. As his dad would say, he was a good mate. If he'd been a girl, Angus would have declared him the ultimate